Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Hope everybody is doing great. So we're putting a link into the chat. It's a tiny questionnaire we'd like all of you to fill out. Yeah, and then we will start. The link has been put into the chat. It would be nice if everybody could just put in this quick questionnaire.
This questionnaire is solely to understand or to reflect on how much you all know as an audience member on this topic. So it would be wonderful if you could fill it out, and that give a good intro to this whole session.
I think there's a small technical issue with the questionnaire. I think we'll start with the session, and somewhere halfway through we can do the questionnaire again. Zara, we can start with the session. I think there is some internet issue with Zara. Edna, can you take over and start?
No,
It's Zara's back.
Yeah.
There was a technical issue. Good evening and welcome. Before we begin the conversations this evening, I would like to bring to your attention a few small things that will make this online program seamless and a pleasant experience for all. During the presentation, to avoid technical difficulties, please mute your mic. For queries or comments, please use the chat box or raise hand option. Also, for technical support, you can message us in the chat box. To see the presentation in full screen, we recommend the side-by-side view option. This meeting is being recorded to be used as further study material. This session is live on YouTube, and the link will be put in the chat box.
This is our agenda for the day. At 6:30 p.m., we welcome and we introduce the webinar series, 𝗲𝗲𝗴𝗴𝗲, the introduction of the team. At 6:35 p.m., we introduce our speaker. At 6:40 p.m. to 7 p.m., Regina will speak on the topic. And at 7 to 7:30 p.m., we will have a Q&A format where the speaker answers the questions asked by the group.
Welcome to webinar number 2, Children and Drugs. This is a 12-part webinar series by 𝗲𝗲𝗴𝗴𝗲, which will pan out one every month. An interaction of young people with experts and advocates of change from around the globe focusing on social development. This brainchild of 𝗲𝗲𝗴𝗴𝗲 is initiated by youngsters and supported by the Fourth Way Foundation.
Now, what is 𝗲𝗲𝗴𝗴𝗲? Short for So Why I Engage. Like all of us young people around the world, we would like to ask questions about a lot of things and find our own answers. So Why is a platform where we seek to ask the right questions to why I engage with the world around me.
𝗲𝗲𝗴𝗴𝗲 is a platform for teens and young adults to engage through conversations, ideation, and discussions with experts from fields of social development. We foresee this as an open space to explore opportunities for working together on matters that shape our world.
We are a group of energetic and proactive teenagers who are ready to make a change in how things are looked at. We aim for these sessions to be a platform where teenagers come together and discuss issues that influence us as a generation and as people. Through this platform, we wish to motivate our contemporaries to come together and be involved in matters that will influence others to understand the problems we face around the world, some of which exist even without our knowledge.
To introduce our core team, we begin with me. Hi, I'm Mika, a 17-year-old who loves movies and anything that runs on an engine.
Hi, I'm Edna, a 16-year-old who loves reading and music.
Hi, I'm Zara, a 15-year-old who loves beats and debating about anything that requires change.
Hi, I'm Manya Ike, a 13-year-old who wants to make the world a better place.
Hi, I'm Mia, an 18-year-old and someone who enjoys outdoor activities and making resin.
Hi, I'm Jacob. I'm a 16-year-old who loves to play sports.
Our speaker for the day is Miss Regina Mattson, as Secretary of the General of World Federation Against Drugs. Regina coordinates the work of the WFAD and the views and participation over 250 member organizations in the in the global debate on drug policy. She is also jointly organizing a gender working group under the WFAD that will focus on the particular situation and double stigmatization of women with drug use disorders.
Moreover, Regina lectures and organizes information campaigns on the issues of violence against women and children. As a part of her position as chair in the Gothenburg local unit of the UN Women Sweden and deputy board member of UN Sweden. Furthermore, she is the member of the European Commission Expert Group Civil Society Forum on Drugs. Regina holds a bachelor in social work and a master in international global studies, specializing in gender issues and conflict resolution. Over to you, Regina.
Thank you so much for this fantastic presentation. It's always quite nerve-wracking to hear somebody else introduce me. We have a thing in Sweden that we don't like to say the things that we have done, so to speak. It's this strange type of culture where we only sort of move in quite slowly, say hello, and then we get on with our presentations. I'm quite unused to this, but thank you so much. It's both an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you today. And I'm very excited both for being part of this webinar today and hopefully in the future to follow your journeys within the So Why project. I will do my best to share my presentation, but it says I have been disabled to do so, so perhaps I will get some help with that. All right. Let's see, so I do this correctly. Always a bit of a difficulty. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Wonderful. Thank you again for having me today and to speak on this topic of children and drugs. It's quite a broad topic, so I'll do my best to get through some key aspects of this situation within the next 15-20 minutes before we head over to the questions. First of all, and I know you presented the WFAD very well, but I always like to keep this in my presentations just to see how much we grow and how quickly we do so. Like mentioned, it's a network of organizations and individuals from across the globe. And just over the past year or so, we've grown from 250 organizations to 320 member organizations in 60 countries. So it's very cool to be part of this big organization with members from so many regions and that focus on so many different aspects within the global drug policy debate. And what we do is that we try to strengthen prevention, increase access to treatment, and promote recovery in everything that we do. And we do this through hosting regional forums and world forums, working closely with the UN and different institutions, as well as some projects with our members. So, as you probably understood by the presentation, children and gender rights are the two topics closest to my heart. And so it's particularly exciting to be here with you today to speak just on this topic. And I'll try to keep a gender aspect throughout, but hopefully we can talk a bit more about the differences in regards to gender as we get closer to the Q&A session. As we know, substance use and abuse continue to be important global health problems and contribute both to morbidity and mortality rates across the globe. So why do we need to talk about the drug use among children and youth? Well, it's partly because prevention efforts are most effective during these ages, but also because during the early to late adolescence is a very critical period for the initiation of substance use and the onset addiction or development into addiction. And as we all know, the world has a growing population of youth. And especially in certain areas of the world, the population is already a majority of youth. And although it's been a while since 2016, it has been recorded that in 2016, 4 in every 10 people worldwide were younger than 25. And we can only assume that this has grown in the past however many years. So I was asked to highlight how drug affects children across the globe, both what can be said to be universal and also some unique differences, and including a gender perspective here. And in the end, I'll highlight the Convention on the Rights of the Child, of course, because it is very important to what we're trying to do in terms of including a gender-centric and child-friendly approach in all of the areas in which we work. So that being said, I know that you probably all heard of and work with the concept of intersectionality. And one person can have very many different traits or function within different and several categories at a time. For instance, the LGBTQI+ community faces particular challenges in relation to drug use and misuse. And the same can be said for other groups such as refugee children and people and children with disabilities. But having a presentation trying to cover all of this might be very hard, so I'll speak a little bit more on the general term, but just to bear in mind that, of course, everything that I say may differ for the individual and depending on what categories in which that person. So the global world drug problem, as we know, there's more than 35 million people that are estimated to suffer from drug addiction. And only 1 in 8 people who need drug-related treatment actually receives this. And for women in particular, this is even less. It has been said that 1 in 5 people in treatment identify as women, and this is on the global level. So in some places, there isn't even an option for women or for young girls to partake in treatment facilities. And surveys on drug use among the general population also show that the extent of drug use among young people still remain higher than among older people. Although there are some exceptions associated with traditional use of drugs such as opium or cat. So let's see here if I can change the slide. The drug use among young people, or among children and youth, it differs from country to country, and it of course depends on the social and economic circumstances of those people involved. And according to the UNODC, who actually made a whole booklet about drugs and age back in 2018, they say that drugs in recreational settings is one of these two divisions that they see most of. And this is a very generalized view just to understand the typical divisions between why and how certain people in certain places use drugs. But one of them being then in the recreational settings. And this is to add excitement or enhance experiences. And this is something that usually happens in the socioeconomically stronger segments of society and also countries at large. And the other side of it is young people in extreme conditions who may be using drugs to cope with their difficult circumstances. And the drugs that are used in these two different settings typically vary as well. And for young people, for instance, residing in street environments, the most commonly used drug is likely to be inhalants, such as paint thinner, petrol, paint, correction fluid, and glue, whereas in these recreational settings, it's other types of drugs, such as ecstasy, cocaine, and similar drugs. So for young people who are residing in street environments or are living in conditions that may be in poverty or similar situations, unfortunately, there are higher rates of kids being exposed to physical and sexual abuse and using then substances as part of a kind of coping mechanism. And although there has been a traditional gender gap, so to speak, in regards to the fact that men typically use drugs more so than women, among adolescents, this gap is narrowing. And we've seen an example of this in one of our members in Uganda. And in their project, they're working with young boys and girls and trying to empower them and support them out of street environments. And what they've seen is that there's an increasing number of adolescent girls that are drinking alcohol and using drugs while engaging in transactional sex. So in this project, young girls are more likely than their male counterparts to engage in alcohol and drug due to these social influences and life vulnerabilities and trying to cope then with the situation that they're facing. So it is important still to bear in mind that children and adolescents, most children and adolescents will never use drugs. And those who do are oftentimes affected by vulnerabilities that are beyond their control. Childhood and adolescence are the ages most prone to onset addiction. And for children in general, early mental and behavioral problems, poverty, lack of opportunities, isolation, and even lack of parental involvement in social support, including negative peer influences, poorly equipped schools, all of these variables are more common among those who develop substance use disorders than among those who do not. So we also know that using drugs in childhood and adolescence or during pregnancy can entail harmful consequences on the developing brain. And as I'm not sure if you've heard, but we have recently learned through research that the brain continues to develop well up into your late 20s. So it's a long term effect that can be caused throughout your childhood, your teenage years, and early adulthood as well. For women who use drugs, childhood traumas and even violence in childhood and later in life are all common denominators. And we've seen that having an intimate partner or family member who uses drugs has been shown to have an increasingly significant effect on the reasons why women and young girls start using drugs. But with the exception of alcohol and tobacco, to see some more similarities, cannabis is considered to be the most commonly used drug among young people. It's typically initiated in the late adolescence and peaks during adulthood. Medical research has shown that those who use cannabis before the age of 16 actually face the risk of acute harm and increased susceptibility to developing drug use disorders, as well as mental health disorders. So this is including personality disorders, anxiety, depression, and even the risk of developing psychosis diseases and even schizophrenia. And there's some evidence shown in the Western countries from the latest World Drug Report that as young people perceive that there's a easily availability of cannabis, whilst understanding the risks of cannabis being very low, that also increases the amount of which people use cannabis. And we have seen this in places such as the United States, where cannabis has become legalized in many states, that not only does the cannabis industry actively target and market towards young people with the use of, gummy bears or inhalants that you can use in school, a lot of bright colors and exciting shapes and everything that targets young people, even though there is a harmful consequence of young people using cannabis. And we talk about this quite a lot, and why is this perceived risk going down? And it's not only the cannabis industry, but also this normalization process that is happening all over the world through TV, through music, pop culture in general, that affects the perceived risk that young people associate with cannabis in particular. So unfortunately, young people are also known to be involved in the cultivation, manufacturing, and production of and trafficking of drugs. In the absence of social and economic opportunities, children and young people may deal drugs to earn money to supplement meager wages. Sometimes, I'm going to take these off, they keep falling down. Young people affected by poverty as well, and other vulnerable groups may be they're coerced into partaking in this type of trafficking and production as well. And in some environments, young people may even be involved in drug supply networks because they're looking for excitement and a means to identify with a local group or local gangs. And this is something that we've seen in one of our projects as well. We have a project in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's called the Sober Youth Healthier Communities Project. And there we work together with local grassroots organizations to support young people, young boys and girls who are involved in something called the Kalunas, which is a local street gang, a violent street gang. And here within this gang, the illicit drug use can be both a cause and a consequence of partaking in these gangs. So what research has shown that is quite equivalent to what we've seen in the Congo is that boys who have experienced childhood adversity, so horrible things that has happened before you're 18, they may use drugs or partake in criminal activity as a means for social defiance, whereas girls who have experienced adversity are more likely to internalize this as anxiety, depression, social withdrawal, and therefore they may use substances for self-medication or as a means to handle trauma. So for both boys and girls, using illicit drugs and alcohol can become a vicious cycle of trauma, or a vicious cycle that sort of continues the trauma whilst trying to cope. So for the young girls and the boys in this project, they're in a context of extreme poverty. There are very many social inequalities, which are also sort of increasing throughout time, and they have a very limited social and economic possibilities in which the context where they live. So in this situation there, the initiation into these violent gangs can be both due to trying to earn some extra money for your family. The kids may still be living at home, or just as a means of trying to find a place in which they can identify, to find a sense of belonging within another group that sort of accepts them for who they are. And many of these young people have witnessed a lot of conflict and violence and traumas in their life. So when we went in and started this project, we based it on the grassroots organizations on the location and their experience in which these young people live. And so we have a holistic approach where we not only focus on psychosocial support and trauma-informed treatment, but also working closely with the families and the local communities and offering vocational training and income-generating activities. So just to highlight the gender differences in why and how people start using drugs and what that kind of looks like as well as you get older. Although women and girls are less likely to initiate drug use than men and boys, and typically begin using later on in life and to a lesser extent, once they have initiated substance use, women tend to increase their rate of consumption more rapidly than men. And this is called telescoping. And compared with men or with boys, despite having used drugs for a shorter period of time, girls and women who enter into treatment usually have more severe profiles of medical, behavioral and social problems. And that being said, this is also a consequence of something that is also a sort of universal fact, that women tend to be detected later on in their onset addiction. So girls and young women have perhaps one could say more tools to hide their addiction, and when they are detected or when they ask for support and when they enter into programs, usually it's gone further and it's quite has a lot of more problems that have been arising throughout the use as well. And it has also been said that women and girls are more likely to begin or maintain a substance use disorder to develop more intimate relationships, whilst on the other hand, boys and men would be more likely to start using because of their male friends or in relation to the drug trade. And as after an addiction has come, or after somebody has started to use substances, women in general, but women who use drugs in particular, are heavily stigmatized. And this results in a situation where women who use drugs become a more hidden population, where cultural and gender-based norms make it difficult for women not only to acknowledge their addiction and leave their homes to undergo treatments, but also for being accepted by the general public. They oftentimes face something called double stigmatization, not only as a person using drugs, but also as a woman who uses drugs, due to these perceived norms in regards to caregiver roles and other expectations that may be faced upon or applied upon a young girl or a young woman, more so than her male or boy counterpart, so to speak. Unfortunately as well, and it should be mentioned, that gender-based violence is something that is very common among women who use drugs, and it can be something that perhaps caused the initiation of drugs, but unfortunately women who use drugs are also more susceptible to, not susceptible, but more often subjected to violence, and not only by an intimate partner, but also by professionals, government authorities, and other people that they meet throughout their use. So the risk and protective factors. The path from initiation to harmful use of substances among young people are, as I said, often influenced by factors beyond their control. So what are these factors? We can say that they are factors on different levels. First of all, on the personal level, which includes sort of the behavioral mental health, and also biological, neurological developments and gene variations. The factors at the micro level is more about parental and family functioning, school and peer influences. And it should be said that a child who has a parent who themselves is suffering from addiction may be more prone to addiction themselves if that protective factor isn't put in place for that person. So risk factors on personal and micro levels for a child can further include parental substance abuse, like I said, lack of social attachment, both to the community at large or to the family or to the self. It can also be caused by trauma, lack of commitment to school, or even engaging with peers themselves at risk. And then finally, the factors at macro level is more the environmental aspects of it all. So the socioeconomic and physical environment in which the young person, the child, is residing. And this could be anything from high drug availability, poverty, and even media's portrayal and exposure to violence. So media's portrayal, like I mentioned earlier, could be that it's normalized within the TV or the music that a person sees, or even within the news. So these factors, of course, vary considerably between individuals, and not all young people, not all children are equally vulnerable to substance use. So these sort of correlate and intersect, and no factor alone is sufficient to lead to the use of substances. But in many cases, this has to be in a specific time, and these influences can change over time as well. So one thing that is very important to mention when we talk about these factors is childhood adversity. And it is defined as experiences before the age of 18 of emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, or even physical neglect and household dysfunction, including parental use of substances. So research shows that different forms of this childhood maltreatment and adversity are associated with an increased likelihood of the initiation of substance use at an early age. And like I said, boys and girls may experience similar situations or different situations, of course, but they handle it in different ways. So a young boy who has experienced trauma at an early age may use the drugs as a means of social defiance, whereas girls do it as more of an internalizing effect, like a coping mechanism. And this is in general. Of course, it differs between every individual as well. But what can then be said about risk and protective factors? Well, it's rather the critical combination of the risk factors that are present and the protective factors that are absent at a particular stage in a young person's life that makes all of the difference. And I've just added this here. I won't go through it, but just in case you want the slides afterwards, it shows quite well the different aspects that could be put in place in regards to the different levels of influences and what some examples of this may be. So what is important when we focus on trying to support young people, children, and youth in preventing them from leading into substance use, even using from the beginning, is something called the protective factors. And as you can see here, there are both risk and protective factors. And some may even say that for every risk factor, there is a protective factor to counterbalance that. And although it may not be that simple, it's quite a good way to illustrate here the differences that can affect young people in good or bad ways, so to speak. So the protective factors on a personal level may include things such as a well-developed personal skills and internalized resources to deal with difficult situations. So an ability to analyze situations and take the right decisions, so to speak, to be able to communicate with others, to communicate your own emotions, to manage stress and enter compromises. So this could make all the difference if a young person is in a situation where they have the possibility or the choice to try a drug, for instance, or not. And then the environmental protective factors could be good personal connections with people, such as adequate resources within the family and family support. The education is, of course, very important. Alternative pursuits, and such as sports, theater, after-school activities, and networks as well that you can sort of rely upon when you need certain internal resources. And also, of course, cultural norms that sort of discourage substance use and laws that regulate this and are well enforced. So I wrote here that prevention is key, and I would say that it for sure is. Prevention interventions entails supporting young people, supporting people, and especially young people, but you can also support adults and older people, of course. And this is to avoid or delay the initiation of the use of substances, or if you've already initiated, to avert the development of substance use disorders. So the overall aim of prevention is quite broad, and according to the UNODC, it is to ensure the healthy and safe development of children and youth so that they can realize their full potentials and talents and become contributing members of the community and society. So a good prevention intervention focuses on strengthening the protective factors that are in place, and this would be the core elements of this. And it's important to keep in mind here that when we focus on prevention, we need to ensure that we have culturally sensitive, age-appropriate, and gender-sensitive and transformative measures, because we have seen that prevention strategies are more or less good depending on if they include a gender-sensitive strategy or not. We can see, for instance, that family-based interventions are usually better for girls, whereas school and community-based interventions are usually better for boys in terms of preventing substance use. And finally, we always have to mention the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And this is not only because it's a fantastic tool, it is groundbreaking in the way in which the world sort of looks at and respects children and young people. And it's not only a good tool to push governments and hold them accountable to incorporating children's voices in the activities that they do, but also in line with what we've talked about today. So all of these things that were mentioned is something that is mentioned also in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And in the Article 33 is actually the only human rights convention that specifically addresses the issue of illicit drugs. And it states that all states need to take appropriate measures to protect children from the illicit use of drugs and also prevent them from partaking in illicit production and trafficking of those substances. So this is a convention in which we can hold governments accountable. All the governments and states who have signed this isn't just something that they could look over, but they have to be held accountable to use this in the work that they do, and they're obliged by this convention in order to follow it in everything that they do going forward. Not only that specifically or directly addresses children, but also indirectly. And that is it for me now. I hope I stayed within the time, and I look forward to hearing your questions. If you want to get in touch, here are my details and our details, and then there's a source list at the end there if you want to read more as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Regina, for that. I think all of us have understood more regarding the topic and have realized how we can help and do something about all those who we know who are facing this issue. The team, we have a few questions ready. The team will be asking you, and we would like you to answer them.
To begin with, Regina, will you kindly let us know a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, that would be my pleasure. I'm not sure where to start. I watched the recording from your first webinar and heard Billy's presentation of himself, and it's very hard to compete with him in anything because he's a great presenter and such an experienced person, and a dear friend that is as well. But I am the youngest of 4 sisters, and we are from a very small island outside the archipelago of Gothenburg. And I don't know if you know, but Sweden only has 11 million inhabitants. So when I say very small island, how many people do you think are living on that island?
Maybe 1,000 people.
Maybe 1,000 people. It's a good assumption. Unfortunately, I grew up on an island with 60 people. And there was no cars, and you could only get to the island on a very, very small ferry that you had to take from a different island. And this sort of affected my upbringing quite a lot, of course, because coming from a small place, it's a very close community and a lot of social control. Being young and trying to get away with whatever you tried to get away with was very hard. But after that, we actually lived in the US for 4 years when I was a young child, and we came back to the same island before I moved into the city of Gothenburg, which is also small, 600,000 people or so in the city, the second biggest city of Sweden. I went to upper secondary school here, and I had the possibility to choose between social work and economics, and I am so glad I chose social work because it has affected my life greatly. It's been fantastic to learn not only how social problems come about, but also how we can strive within the realm of social work to try to make the world a better place, so to speak. And that's something that I've been trying to do since then. I am a person with a lot of privileges, and I want to be able to, or strive to use my privileges to do a bit better for the world and ensure that I can create room for people who might not otherwise have that room to partake. I'm not sure if that tells anything really about me, but I should say as well that that's more or less my whole personality. I go to work and I work here, and then after work, I head over to my different organizations such as UN Women, where I try to work with the women's rights and equality. So it's more or less what I do 24 hours a day, which is a bit boring to tell, but very fun to live.
Thank you, Regina. We would like to know what inspired you to do the work that you're doing now.
Another hard question. Well, I come from a family that's always been very engaged in social issues, and not only through union work or social enterprises, but I've had the great pride to have a fantastic mother who is my biggest inspiration and role model. And she worked a long time with developing an organization that focused on providing rehabilitation and income generating activities for people who's been in conflict with the law or has battled addiction or are in their recovery journey. So my inspiration came very much from my mother, and that has grown throughout the years. And after my bachelor in social work, I had the opportunity to work with young people who came as refugees to Sweden in 2014, 2015. And as many things in social work, and I can only assume it's similar in India, but in Sweden, it's very politically determined how much or how little we can do for people. And when the political situation changed, I felt I was only sort of putting out fires rather than being able to do actual transformative work and supporting the young people with what they needed and wanted. So I wanted to continue to grow and study my master's to be able to try to work on a more structural level, because I do believe that a lot of social problems come from a structural level and decisions that are made there, and that's how I at least want to work to try to change that. And I was lucky enough to be able to partake in WFAD throughout my master. So I was able to learn and get inspired from the work that WFAD has been doing, and Linda my previous boss was doing, and I could latch that on to what I was learning in school, and my inspiration just grew to abundance. So that's long story short, I think.
Thank you, Regina. Can you share something interesting going on with the WFAD and the work you are doing right now?
Oh, I think this is the hardest question of them all, because there are so many exciting things going on with the WFAD at the moment. We have just recently finalized a gender training for all of our members, and we'll be working on a children's rights training in the next coming months. And I know I said yesterday at our meeting, and I hope that we will be able to partner up with 𝗲𝗲 on this and have maybe even a full day where you can decide the agenda and set the tone for all of our members in the next coming years. And apart from this, we have a Nordic Summit on Cannabis coming up, and this is something that is free, and you will be able to participate online if you want to do so, and I can send all of these links afterwards. We have a webinar series on prevention, which will be very exciting, and then of course all of our projects. We do so many fantastic projects together with our members in different settings, two of which now focus particularly on children and youth. One is the project in the DRC, which I mentioned, and the other one is in a very small country called Georgia that focuses on art therapy for young people. So very excited to see what this sort of autumn will bring, and hope to see you all in a lot of these different environments.
Thank you, Regina. So why, in your opinion, should teens be socially aware?
Well, it all starts with you. It all starts with us. The amount of power and possibility and drive and go within young people is just incredibly transforming, and doing things individually or in groups is just something that can change the world. And we've seen that not only in today's event that we can meet like this, but also in people like our own Swedish 𝗲hes 𝗴𝗴𝗲, who started very small, and now her efforts to make the world see the environmental change has become global. And it's not only her, of course, there's a lot of people all over the world that's been joining hands to do this. And I think it's just incredible to see how much we can do, because unfortunately we both adults, and I don't know if I can still call myself young, I'm 30 in 6 months, but all of us commonly sort of underestimate our ability to make a difference in the world, and oftentimes misjudge the ramifications of our actions at a larger scale. But in reality, we can be the change that we want to see, and working together and joining hands like you're doing through this project, I think is the right first step, and I will get very far. So it's important for teens to be socially aware, because I know Billy said something about you are the future, but you're also the now. And I would just like to reiterate that point. And I don't even know if I have to answer or hope that teens should be socially aware, because it's my understanding that teens are the most socially aware segment of the population. So we should all listen more to teens in these regards.
Thank you, Regina. Can you tell us about the role of the UN and drug prevention program focused on teens and young adults?
Sure. So I would say that's twofold. On one hand, the United Nations are the ones who sort of offer this broad convention of the rights of the child that we can use to hold states accountable for the work that they're doing, and accountable in regards to ensuring the equal participation of children and the rights and the needs of children to be respected within that particular state, but also on a global agenda. And on the other hand, the UN also offers a lot of strategies and tools and methods and guides that we can use when we want to focus on prevention activities in regards to young people. For instance, they made the international tool guide, the International Standards of Prevention, and it's a really good tool guide that you can use not only to see sort of these general or sort of universal aspects of prevention and what is important, but they also have different categories for each sort of age span in which a person may live, and what best practice examples from different parts of the world that you can read and look and try to highlight in your own setting. So they offer a wide range of really good tools and methods.
Thank you, Regina. So when it comes to drug usage habits and management of the issue, we heard that there's a gender factor involved. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes,
Were you able to
sure.
hear me? Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, there is indeed a gender factor involved in not only why somebody initiates drug use, but also what it looks like for that person and the sort of services that are available for a person based on their gender. Unfortunately, this is similar in all parts of the world. It's not just certain countries or certain places, but it's a very universal situation where, for example, young girls, like I said, they are detected much later on in life. There are a lot of experiences that have been shared where they say that, for instance, in a group of young boys and girls who are all using drugs or have drugs on them, and the police come, the police will only talk to the boys and ask the girls to go home. Or in schools, you're much less, there's a less sort of assumption that a young girl will be doing drugs. So this sort of also leads into the late detection. And the problem there when the detection comes in later is that you're not given the support that you would have needed earlier on. And usually the trajectory has become much further. And in the worst case, it's also more traumas and negative experiences that will need a lot of more time and support to cope with. And it's the same, I mean, it's not the same, but it's similar situations as a young girl grows into a woman. And I mentioned that as well in terms of double stigmatization and the types of interventions that are offered. For instance, the general sort of number is that 1 in 5 women who need treatment are in treatment, but in a lot of countries and a lot of places, there isn't any treatment offered to women at all, or there is, but you may have children and you don't have access to child care services, or you may not be able to leave your child at home. And we know as well that there are very little or very few possibilities for a young person to enter into treatment, regardless of their gender. And if they do, sometimes they have to be in treatment facilities with adults, which is also negative, not only for girls, but of course for boys as well. And there are also, for boys, because gender, of course, is both boys and girls and other identities, there are these problems of certain norms in terms of masculinity and lacking the possibility, perhaps, or the tools to speak about your emotions. For instance, as a young boy, you may not be, or you probably heard the boys will be boys and boys don't cry typology, and that's something that we also need to work against, because not being able to communicate your emotions and feelings may also revert you into doing things that are negative for your body and for your development as well. So there is a lot of things to be said about gender. I'm not sure if you perhaps have more questions in regards to this. Please just let me know.
Thank you, Regina. We now open the platform for questions from those participating. You can use the raise hand option and we will unmute you. Or you can also type your questions in the chat box, which we can read out and Regina can answer.
Just to cut in, we're waiting for questions from the audience, but We had one more question for you, Regina. Now that you've met the SOVI team, can you give us your thoughts and ideas about a way forward for us, SOVI, as a team?
I would love to, well, I would love to. I'm not entirely sure that I have any new thoughts to say. I had the pleasure of meeting you yesterday, and you told me about your plans for your further developments in the group and engaging more and more young people and sort of continuing to grow. And I believe that that is a great initiative, and that you will do very well in this. And I agree with your vision to expand and to keep learning from one another, and to keep caring for one another, which is very obvious that you do. And just taking the opportunities that are presented to you. I don't know, I rather ask you about your thoughts and ideas about the way forward for WFAD. I think that will be a much more interesting conversation, and I would love to have that with you going forward.
Thank you, Regina. I think one of the audience have sent in a question. So they were wondering, how can we personally contribute within our communities regarding drug abuse? What can we do as individuals in our communities regarding substance abuse?
Thank you. That's a very good question. There's a lot that can be done, and I would say it's partly in what we're doing today, talking about the issue and learning from one another, and trying to counteract this normalization process that's been going on. But also in terms of prevention, it's not always the best to educate on the harms of drugs or the harms of alcohol, the harms of tobacco, but rather to focus on strengthening the protective factors in place. So if you have a community in which a lot of people are vulnerable perhaps to substance use, engaging them in other activities, sports or theater, or starting a band, or anything that you can do either through school or through organizations such as Fourth Wave Foundation, or by yourself, just engaging in supporting in educational situations, doing homework together. There's a lot of, it's more about the support that you give that can counteract the sometimes negative influences that are around. So and doing that with the knowledge of what drugs can do and the harmful consequences in the back of your mind, so that you can have that conversation and support that person when it comes up, or talking about talking about this whilst focusing on something fun that you can do together, I would say.
Thank you, Regina. Do we have more questions?
Deborah has raised hands.
Hi, I think I was allowed to unmute after that. So anyway, here's my question. So you said that you had done a lot of work with grassroots organizations. So I was wondering whether you could elaborate on that, like, because
Deborah Tekka Tankar.
My name is Tekka Tankar. Yeah. So yeah, I was just wondering whether you could talk more about your work with grassroots organizations specifically.
Of course. Would you like to know grassroots organizations within the realm of WFAD or in general?
In general, that's, yeah.
Interesting.
That's fine.
All right. Yeah, of course. Thank you for your question, Deborah. Well, in terms of WFAD, being a member organization, all the work that we do is in collaboration with grassroots organizations. Most of our members are grassroots organizations and work specifically in certain contexts, either with specific groups or settings, or a certain area of the place in which they live, a country or city. So through that, we organize different projects, such as the one in the DRC. We have a project in 3 countries in Western Balkans that focuses on supporting people in their recovery journey. So after an addiction and the recovery journey, after that in family support, there's possibilities of telephone calls and everything like that. So we do a lot of work in that way. And then on my spare time, I'm also engaged in organizations that work specifically with gender issues, trying to raise equality, trying to support women's needs and rights within the communities in Sweden in which I live. And so they're organized in different ways. We try to start them and then we try to decide what we want to do, but mostly it's partly informative and educational. So we try to go to schools or to community leaders or like libraries and talk about, in this case, gender-based violence, intimate partner violence. We try to engage in activities and create webinars such as this one, for instance. And when we were able to see each other in person, we like to do these little conferences and do not only conferences with only panels or presentations, but also we had art gallery one time. We did like theater one time on the topic. We had something called civil defense, trying to translate now from Swedish, civil defense. So how would you act if you saw somebody subject somebody on the street to racism or sexism, or if somebody said something bad in your work group, how would you react? Those kind of things. So it really depends on the setting as well. I'm not sure if that was an answer to your question, Deborah. Please let me know if I should elaborate.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Jacob?
Now I take the opportunity to thank Regina for her presence here.
Just a minute. I'm so sorry. Mia. Sorry.
Yeah, no, actually, before I go forward with the part, actually, I wanted to ask a question. So it's like more like a general hypothetical question. So if you were to know someone who is using drugs, and I mean, as teenagers, there's not much we can do, because it's like if you were to go and tell an adult, then probably a friendship with the person who's going to go into the dustbin, because like they're going to be like, you betrayed me and all of that. So, how would you help that person out then? Because you can't openly tell about it and only you know about it. So how would you help them?
That's a very good question. It's hard. It's hard to help a person directly, unfortunately. Not only because usually a person needs to decide for themselves when they want to seek help or support. It's rare that a person initiates it on the basis of a friend or a partner or a family member or parents asking them to, unfortunately, because it needs to come from within. So what I would say is rather to try to support that person. Usually, not always, of course, but usually people use drugs to cope with something or because something negative is happening in their lives. And if so, perhaps supporting that person on the basis of what's going on. If he or she is able to talk to you about their emotions, or if something has happened, to try to focus on that rather than the drug itself. But of course, also because there are, like mentioned, recreational drug users, to try to counterbalance that and say we can have fun without it, or there are other ways that we can hang out, or that kind of thing. But unfortunately it is very hard, and it's oftentimes if your friend is using drugs, you just want to help them and support them the best that you can, and it's very hard to do so unless that person wants to receive the help. So just being there for them, listening to them, supporting them as best as you can is usually the best step, because once they're ready, they're going to come to you and ask if you know the next step.
Thank you, Regina. Before we conclude this evening's conversations, I would like to bring to your attention the link posted in chat. Kindly click on the link and fill out a very simple Google form with your details so that we can update you about our next webinar and events that 𝗲𝗲 will conduct in bringing young people together.
These thematic webinars will be an open platform for any teenager to engage in discussion with international experts from the social development sector. Individuals can register and participate in any webinar of their choice. A participation certificate will be awarded to all participants.
You guys can also sign up for the one-year program and be active participants in all thematic webinars and contribute to build the 𝗲𝗲 program. Engagers will support the core team in organizing the thematic webinars. An engager will also pave the way for becoming a part of the 𝗲𝗲 core team. The course completion certificate will be awarded to the completion of 1 year.
Just as a preview to our next webinar session, which will be in the month of September, the exact date of which will be notified shortly. Our topic would be further on children around the world, and our speaker will be another internationally renowned figure in the social development sector. The speaker will also be announced shortly. Hope to catch you all for that webinar session as well.
Now, I take the opportunity to thank Regina for her presence here today. We thank you for making our webinar a great success. Thanks for speaking to us on such an important topic. We thank you for sharing your ideas and views with us. We are so glad to have you with us. Thank you for taking time out to be here and speak to us today.
We would like to thank 𝗲𝗲 Foundation and iScan for providing us the opportunity to have a platform where we can freely and honestly express our views and learn from the experts across the globe. We would like to thank the team at 𝗲𝗲 Foundation of Shalini, Amala, and Darshan for orienting us, and we look forward to your continued support.
And last but not least, I thank our contemporaries, the young people present today. Thanks for making this a success with your presence. We sincerely hope you find value in this engagement as much as we have found. Hope to catch up with all of you for next webinar. Until then, stay safe and good night.
Thanks, Regina. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having